Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today. Well, we've sifted through a really diverse stack of global news, everything from the earliest moments of the universe right down to the nitty-gritty of today's politics.
Yeah, and we're aiming to pull out the essential insights, the stuff you really need to know, and get it to you quickly, but thoroughly.
It's quite the spread today, isn't it?
It really is. We're looking at these huge cosmic discoveries from the James Webb Space Telescope, or JWST, and connecting them straight to, well, the urgent need to figure out how we govern artificial intelligence, AI.
And then there are these global economic tensions, supply chains, rare earths, tying right into the tactical situation in places like Ukraine.
Exactly. I think a big theme running through all of this is just speed. The sheer acceleration of scientific understanding, but also, unfortunately, geopolitical friction.
Absolutely. And we've got some genuinely mind-bending stuff lined up for you. We'll talk about how astronomers are basically ripping up old textbooks because the universe got going much faster than anyone thought.
Yeah.
Then we pivot straight back to Earth. President Trump's recent moves, sanctions, troop threats in Nigeria. We need to unpack the global reaction.
And yes, that new trade deal. Why does it all seem to hang on who can make the most microchips for cars? We'll get into that too.
It's a journey, all right. Billions of years in the first segment, then crashing right back down to the messy present.
So let's dive in, starting, as always, way out there.
Yeah.
The cosmic frontier.
Okay, let's kick off with this JWST discovery. It feels like more than just news. It's shaking up the foundations a bit, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The James Webb Space Telescope has delivered again big time. They've pinpointed this galaxy. Its official designation is JADE-VT Z14-0.
JADES. That's the JWST Advanced Deep Extragalactic Survey.
That's the one. And what they found is just staggering. The light from this galaxy started its journey just 290 million years after the Big Bang.
Okay, pause there.
Yeah.
290 million years. The universe is, what, 13.8 billion years old now?
Roughly, yeah.
So we're looking at something that formed when the universe was, like, less than 2% of its current age. Why is that specific number, 290 million, such a big deal for the models?
Well, because all the previous models, the ones built on data from Hubble and other older telescopes, they suggested it took much longer.
Right. I remember figures like 400, maybe 500 million years being thrown around.
Exactly. That was the thinking. Gravity needed that much time for gas clouds to cool down enough, for dark matter halos to gather, for enough stuff to clump together to actually form stable, big galaxies.
Or finding a fully formed, apparently quite massive galaxy like JD's Jesse's 014-0 so incredibly early.
It just forces cosmologists to squash that whole timeline dramatically. It implies that structure formation back then was way, way faster than we thought.
Does it mean we need to rethink basic physics or maybe dark matter's role?
It could. It might mean adjusting our ideas about density fluctuations right after the Big Bang, or maybe how dark matter behaved differently in that very early epoch. It really opens up a lot of questions.
And it wasn't just that it existed so early, it was what was inside it, right? The chemistry was surprising.
That's perhaps the most shocking part, yeah. Early spectral analysis showed a surprising amount of oxygen in this galaxy.
Oxygen. But that's not something created in the Big Bang itself.
Not at all. Oxygen is a heavier element. It has to be forged inside stars specifically, those really massive, hot, first-generation stars, sometimes called population 3 stars.
Okay, so stars have to form, live their lives, and then explode as supernovae to spread that oxygen around.
Precisely. So if you're seeing significant oxygen just 290 million years in,
It means that entire cycle of star birth, life, and death happened incredibly fast.
warp speed, basically. That stellar evolutionary clock was running way faster than our models predicted. It forces a complete rethink of how quickly the early universe got enriched with heavier elements.
So more stars forming, faster, burning out quicker.
Yeah, it suggests star formation was maybe more widespread, more efficient, and those early stellar life cycles were brutally short, turning primordial hydrogen and helium into things like oxygen with startling speed.
Wow. And speaking of speed and detail, the JWST isn't just looking back to the dawn of time. It's giving us these incredible dynamic views of planets closer to home, relatively speaking, like this 3D map of an exoplanet's atmosphere.
Yeah, that was another major technical achievement. They focused on WASP-18b. It's an ultra-hot gas giant, orbits its star really closely, about 400 light years away.
400 light years.
Yeah.
Practically next door in cosmic terms. So how do you map an atmosphere in 3D from that far away?
It's pretty ingenious, actually. It's called 3D eclipse mapping. They look for tiny, tiny changes in the light spectrum as the planet orbits its star.
Especially when it goes behind the star, the eclipse part.
Exactly. As different parts of the planet, the super hot day side, the terminator line where day meets night, the cooler night side as these parts are revealed and then hidden during the orbit and eclipse, the light signature changes. By carefully analyzing those changes, they can piece together a 3D map of temperature and even chemical composition across the atmosphere.
And WASP-18b turned out to be pretty extreme.
Oh, yeah. We're talking temperatures hitting around 2,756 degrees Celsius. That's hotter than molten rock, hot enough to melt most metals we know.
Wow.
And what's really wild is that in some of these superheated thermal zones, the energy is so intense, it literally breaks water molecules apart. HO just gets ripped into hydrogen and oxygen atoms.
So it gives us this unprecedented window into just how violent and dynamic the atmospheres of these hot Jupiters can be.
Absolutely. It shows the extreme conditions that can exist out there.
It's amazing how quickly complexity, like galaxies and these extreme planets, emerged in the universe. And yet, here on Earth, complex life, or at least the conditions for it, took a while longer to establish. Which brings us to the Great Oxidation Event, the GOE.
Right. The GOE, that time when oxygen finally started building up in our atmosphere. But the puzzle has always been the delay. We know the first oxygen-producing microbes, the cyanobacteria, were around much, much earlier.
So why did it take nearly 1 billion years for oxygen levels to really take off?
Well, new research points to a fascinating interplay of geochemistry and biology. It seems tiny amounts of trace compounds acted like a brake.
What kind of compounds?
Things like nickel, mostly from intense volcanic activity back then, and also urea, a nitrogen compound. High levels of nickel in the early oceans apparently really favored the growth of methanogens.
Those are the microbes that produce methane gas.
Correct. And methane is a potent greenhouse gas, but it also reacts really strongly with free oxygen, basically scrubbing it out of the atmosphere as soon as it appeared.
So more nickel meant more methane producers.
Which meant less chance for the oxygen made by cyanobacteria to actually accumulate. The methanogens were essentially outcompeting them, metabolically speaking, keeping oxygen levels suppressed.
Until the volcanoes calmed down.
Yeah, as volcanic activity eventually waned over geological time, nickel levels in the oceans dropped. That starved the methanogens, while changes in urea concentrations also played a role. This finally gave the cyanobacteria, the oxygen producers, the edge they needed. The atmosphere finally tipped towards oxygen.
It's a fantastic example of how geology and biology are just completely intertwined in shaping a planet. Okay, let's shift scale dramatically now, from microbes to, well, huge dinosaurs. The Nanotyrannus debate. Is it settled?
It looks like it, yeah. This has been a bone of contention literally for decades in paleontology. Was this smaller, faster tyrannosaur called Nanotyrannus just a teenager T-Rex, or was it its own distinct species?
Always sounded like a fun argument.
It was. But new research, based on a really well-preserved, pretty complete specimen, seems to provide the definitive answer. Nanotyrannus lancensis is its own species.
What was the key evidence that swung it?
A couple of things. They looked closely at the growth rings inside the bones. Think of them like tree rings.
Right.
These rings showed the animal wasn't in a rapid juvenile growth spurt like you'd expect for a young T-Rex. It was approaching adult size, but with a different, slower growth pattern. Plus, details in the skull, like the snout shape and even the teeth, were consistently different from known T-Rex juveniles, even very young ones.
So that means T-Rex wasn't the only big predator stalking around at the end of the Cretaceous period.
Exactly. We now have evidence for at least 2 large tyrannosaurs coexisting. T-Rex, the massive bone crusher, and Nanotyrannus, likely a smaller, faster, maybe more agile predator going after different prey.
That changes the whole picture of that ecosystem.
It really does. It forces paleontologists to redraw the Tyrannosauridae family tree a bit and rethink those predator-prey dynamics. It's a great example of how science moves forward. You get new data, you have to be willing to update your understanding, even about something as iconic as T-Rex.
And sticking with predators, one last bit from the natural world confirmation of something that sounds almost mythical. A bat that hunts birds.
In Europe?
Yeah, it does sound like something out of folklore, doesn't it? But after about 25 years of suspicion and anecdotal evidence, we finally have solid proof about Europe's largest bat, the greater noctual bat, Nyctalis lasiopteris.
And how did they finally nail down this behavior? It must happen high up and fast.
Technology, essentially. They managed to fit these tiny advanced tracking devices bioligers onto the bats. These gadgets recorded not just their movements using GPS and accelerometers, but crucially also recorded audio.
Audio, like listening in on the bats.
Pretty much. The recordings confirmed the bats were actively hunting small songbirds, specifically migrating birds called passerines, catching them right in midair. And the altitude is incredible, often over a kilometer up.
Wow.
The devices even picked up the distinct sounds of the bats. Well, chewing and processing their prey while still flying.
That implies some seriously sophisticated echolocation. To pick out a small bird, not an insect, at that heightened speed, it's an amazing adaptation. They're basically using their sonar to tap into these nocturnal bird migrations, turning a challenging but potentially rich food source into part of their diet. A really cool insight into predator-prey dynamics happening right over our heads at night.
Okay, so if the natural world is revealing all this unexpected speed and complexity, the human world, especially where technology and politics meet, seems to be scrambling to keep up. Let's talk about AI.
Yeah, artificial intelligence. It's arguably the new great power competition front line. And that was really clear at the recent Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, APEC.
Where China made a significant proposal.
That's right. President Xi Jinping really pushed for establishing a, quote, global body to govern AI technologies.
Now, China frames this as being about safety, cooperation, shared standards, which sounds good on paper.
It does, but if you're reading the geopolitical tea leaves, especially from Washington or Brussels,
You see it as a strategic play, a way to counter U.S. influence in setting the rules.
that's definitely the dominant interpretation in the West, yeah. Look, whoever gets to define the global standards and norms for a transformative technology like AI gains a massive long-term advantage.
And China might worry that standards developed mainly by the U.S. and Europe, reflecting democratic values, could hinder their own AI development, especially for things like state surveillance.
Precisely. So, by proposing a new global body, Beijing is trying to essentially seize the initiative. They want to ensure that any global AI governance framework includes or maybe even prioritizes principles that align with their interests, perhaps more emphasis on national security and state control, potentially less on the individual privacy or open innovation championed elsewhere.
It highlights the urgency, though. We need some kind of governance because AI isn't just theoretical anymore. It's moving into the physical world, which brings us to that slightly weird experiment with the robot that started channeling Robin Williams.
Right, that was interesting. It was part of research into what's called embodied AI, basically connecting these powerful large language models, LLMs, to physical robots.
So giving the AI a body to interact with the world.
Exactly. In this case, they hooked up a sophisticated LLM to a relatively simple robot. I think it was designed for cleaning tasks or something similar. The goal was just to see how the AI's mind behaved when it could physically move and perceive in real space.
And it developed a personality, or mimicked one.
It started synthesizing conversation, jokes, witty remarks, with timing that observers found genuinely engaging and funny. So much so, they compared its style to the rapid-fire observational humor of the late Robin Williams.
Did the AI know it was doing that?
Probably not in a conscious sense. It was drawing on its vast training data of human language, which includes tons of comedy, and it synthesized patterns that resonated as similar.
But that immediately raises huge ethical questions, right? It's one thing for ChatGPT to write a funny paragraph. It's another for a physical robot in your home to start acting like a specific, beloved deceased comedian.
Absolutely. It pushes buttons around personality rights, the uncanny valley effect, digital appropriation. As companies race to create AI companions or service robots that feel relatable, this shows the potential and the danger of simulating complex human traits like humor and empathy.
Do we need rules about AI mimicking specific people?
It certainly accelerates the need for that conversation. What are the legal and ethical boundaries for AI personality? How do we process forming emotional connections with machines designed to perfectly mimic human interaction? We need answers faster than we're currently getting them.
It's fascinating. We're using cutting-edge tech to model the future, but at the same time, other tech, like ancient DNA analysis, is still busy rewriting our past.
That's a great point. Advances in sequencing DNA from ancient human remains are just revolutionizing our understanding of early migrations. For years, archaeology relied mainly on physical evidence tools, bones, pottery.
Which often suggested a slower, more linear spread of people.
Kind of, yeah. But the DNA tells a much more dynamic story. It reveals these incredibly complex, widespread, and sometimes surprisingly rapid movement networks that we just couldn't see clearly from artifacts alone.
How does it do that? By tracing genetic markers.
Exactly. By analyzing mitochondrial DNA, which tracks the maternal line, and Y chromosome DNA for the paternal line from remains found in different places and different times, researchers can spot specific genetic links between populations separated by huge distances.
Are there concrete examples of these unexpected connections?
Yes, definitely. Recent studies have shown clear genetic ties between remains found, say, in parts of Eurasia and North Africa, suggesting people were using coastal routes or following major river systems much more extensively than we thought.
And I heard whispers about even more controversial links, maybe between continents.
Well, there's growing, though still debated, genetic evidence hinting at very ancient networks that might have connected populations across vast oceans, potentially even linking Africa and the Americas far earlier than the standard timelines suggest. It implies our ancestors might have had much more sophisticated maritime skills much earlier. They were incredible networkers.
Wow. Okay, shifting from ancient history to a very current and grim governance issue. The safety of journalists, especially online and especially for women.
Yeah, this came into focus around the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. The United Nations put out a truly horrific statistic.
Which was?
Globally, almost 90% of cases where journalists are murdered remain unsolved. Impunity is the norm, not the exception.
And that's particularly bad in conflict zones like Gaza.
Extremely so. Journalists there are working under unbelievable pressure and facing appalling casualty rates. When attacks on the press consistently go unpunished, it sends a chilling message. Doing this vital job is incredibly dangerous, and you probably won't get justice if something happens.
In UNESCO, the UN's Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization highlighted how technology is making this worse, particularly for women journalists. Their ChatGBV campaign.
Yes, ChatGBV, standing for Gender-Based Digital Violence. It's a critical issue. UNESCO's research found that a shocking 73% of women journalists have experienced online violence threats, harassment, coordinated smear campaigns.
And AI is being used as a weapon in this.
Increasingly, yes. AI tools are being weaponized to create deepfakes, for instance. These are hyper-realistic fake videos or images, often used to generate degrading, sexualized, or defamatory content about women journalists, specifically to destroy their credibility and reputation.
Which then fuels real-world threats and silences their reporting.
Exactly. The technology makes the attacks more potent, harder to trace, and more psychologically damaging. It's not just trolling, it's often a targeted, tech-assisted campaign to intimidate and silence critical voices. It's a direct assault on press freedom and democracy itself.
So governments and tech platforms need entirely new strategies to combat this.
They do. It requires recognizing digital violence as real violence and developing much stronger methods for detection, prevention, and prosecution. Justice for journalists now absolutely requires robust digital safety governance.
Let's move now to the sharp end of geopolitics, military tensions and ongoing conflicts. Starting with Ukraine, specifically the intense fighting around the city of Pokrovsk in the east. Russia calls it Krasnoyarsk, right?
That's right. It's old Soviet-era name. And Pokrovsk is incredibly strategic. It's a major railway hub, a key logistical center for Ukrainian forces in the Donbass.
So if Russia were to take it or even encircle it?
It will be a huge blow to Ukraine's defenses in the region, potentially forcing a significant pullback. The situation there right now is very tense, and we're getting wildly different stories from each side.
What's the Russian narrative? What are they claiming happened recently?
Moscow's Ministry of Defense put out statements claiming they'd stopped a major Ukrainian operation near Pokrovsk. They described it as an attempt by Ukrainian special forces to land troops using helicopters deep behind Russian lines.
And Russia says they stopped it.
Yeah, they claim they used their own counter-special forces and heavy firepower to repel the landing, portraying it as a big defensive win and a sign of Ukrainian desperation.
But Ukraine denies that narrative, or at least denies that the city is about to fall.
General Alexander Syrsky, Ukraine's commander-in-chief, flatly denied claims that Pokrovsk was encircled. He insists Ukrainian forces are holding their ground, though he didn't downplay the severity. He confirmed Russia has massed a huge force there. His words were a multi-thousand-strong contingent.
So Ukraine is reinforcing the area?
Heavily. They've reportedly sent some of their best units, including special forces, to bolster the defense. It clearly shows how strategically vital they consider Pokrovsk to be. They're determined to hold it.
And while this intense ground battle is happening, Russia's also making moves on the strategic nuclear front, unveiling a new submarine.
Well, technically a missile cruiser, but yes, a major piece of hardware. The Khabarovsk. It was officially unveiled at the Severodvinsk shipyard up north.
And the Khabarovsk is significant because...
Its primary purpose is to carry the Poseidon underwater drone.
Ah, the Poseidon. That's the weapon President Putin himself has talked about, calling it basically unstoppable. Why do they make that claim? Why uncatchable?
Poseidon is a whole different beast. It's a nuclear-powered autonomous underwater vehicle, basically a giant nuclear-tipped torpedo drone. Because it's nuclear-powered, it theoretically has unlimited range.
So it doesn't need to surface, doesn't need refueling.
Right. And it's designed to operate at extreme depths and speeds that current anti-submarine warfare systems would struggle to detect or intercept. The idea is it could bypass coastal defenses entirely, approach targets like carrier groups or coastal cities from unexpected angles.
So its position is a guaranteed second strike weapon, ensuring retaliation no matter what.
That's the message, yes.
Yeah.
It's about ensuring they can penetrate any missile defense shield the U.S. or NATO might build. Unveiling the Khabarovsk now is a very clear signal, flexing that strategic deterrent muscle amidst the ongoing tensions.
And that tension feeds directly into debates in the West, like the one about sending more advanced weapons to Ukraine. Specifically, the idea of giving them Tomahawk cruise missiles from the U.S.
That prospect immediately triggered a sharp reaction from Moscow. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, explicitly warned against it, calling it a major escalation.
Arguing it wouldn't lead to peace.
Yeah, their line was that sending more sophisticated, long-range offensive weapons would just prolong the fighting and make a negotiated settlement harder.
But interestingly, President Trump decided not to send the Tomahawks in the end. What was the administration's reasoning?
They gave two main reasons publicly. First, President Trump stated that Tomahawks are vital for America's own defense stockpiles and readiness and couldn't just be given away lightly.
Okay, preserving U.S. capability. What was the second reason?
They also argued that Ukrainian forces would need really extensive, time-consuming training to operate such a complex weapon system effectively, suggesting it wouldn't provide an immediate battlefield advantage anyway.
So, framed as a practical decision based on U.S. needs and logistical realities.
That was the administration's framing, yes. Of course, critics on the other side saw it differently, interpreting it as potentially weakening support for Kyiv. But the official line was about U.S. readiness and practicality.
Okay. Moving away from the Russia-Ukraine axis, President Trump made waves with a pretty startling statement about Nigeria, issued via social media, threatening military action?
He did, yeah. It was quite direct. President Trump instructed the newly renamed Department of War, which is, of course, still formally the Department of Defense, to prepare plans for potential military intervention in Nigeria.
And the justification was?
The stated reason was to target Islamist militant groups allegedly committing, in his words, horrible atrocities against Christians, which he claimed the Nigerian government wasn't doing enough to stop.
Now, the situation in Nigeria is incredibly complex. Is there a consensus among regional experts or human rights groups that Christians are being singled out disproportionately in the way the statement implied?
It's much more complicated than that simple narrative suggests. Yes, horrific violence is carried out by groups like Boko Haram and ISWAP, the Islamic State West Africa province, and Christians are absolutely among the victims, sometimes targeted specifically, but...
It's not the whole story.
No. Human rights organizations consistently point out that the violence has multiple roots. There are long-standing ethnic conflicts, resource competition, particularly fights over land and water between largely Muslim nomadic herders and mainly Christian-settled farmers. It's not just purely religious persecution.
How did Nigeria react?
President Bola Ahmed Tinubu responded quite strongly. He defended his government's efforts to protect all its citizens, regardless of religion, and essentially called Trump's characterization inaccurate and unhelpful, potentially even inflammatory given the delicate situation on the ground.
It highlights the difficulty of applying simple narratives to complex conflicts. Shifting to alliances now, a concerning report came out about NATO's readiness.
Yeah, this report raised some serious questions about NATO's ability to react quickly. It suggested that despite all the talk of rapid response forces, NATO might actually need weeks, not days, to deploy significant forces in a crisis.
Weeks? Why such a long delay? Is it equipment? Troops?
Surprisingly, it's mostly bureaucracy. Particularly, the paperwork involved in moving military assets, troops, vehicles, supplies across national borders, even within the European Union, where many NATO members are.
You mean like customs forms and permits? For military convoys?
Exactly. The requirements for diplomatic clearances vary wildly from country to country. There's no single seamless system.
Can you give an example of how bad the difference is?
Well, the report highlighted that while the EU tries to aim for a standard 5-day notice period for military transit, at least one key member country apparently still requires up to 45 days notice to approve military assets crossing its territory.
45 days. That completely undermines the idea of rapid response.
Totally. It stems from issues of national sovereignty, different tax laws, customs rules, but the end result is logistical friction that could be disastrous in a real fast-moving crisis. It's a major vulnerability despite increased defense spending.
And finally, on the diplomatic front, President Trump drew a hard line on sanctions, even with a leader considered somewhat aligned with him, Hungary's Viktor Orban.
Right. Prime Minister Orban has, maintained relatively close ties with Moscow compared to other EU leaders. He formally asked the U.S. for an exemption for Hungary from the sanctions targeting Russia's big state oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil.
What was Orban's argument for needing an exemption?
He argued that Hungary is landlocked and heavily dependent on existing Russian pipelines and energy infrastructure. He claimed they just couldn't realistically switch away from Russian energy sources quickly without crippling their economy.
And President Trump's response?
A firm no. The administration's position was clear. Maintaining a united front on sanctions against Russia was the priority. Granting an exemption to Hungary, even acknowledging their specific challenges, would set a bad precedent, potentially weaken the whole sanctions regime, and undermine the pressure on Moscow.
Let's pivot now to the economy, both at home and globally. Starting with a really charged domestic issue in the U.S., the fight over funding for SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or food stamps, this got tangled up in government shutdown threats.
It did, and it created a huge amount of anxiety for millions of Americans who rely on SNAP. What happened was, amidst all the budget deadlock politics, 2 different federal judges actually issued rulings.
Rulings about SNAP?
Yeah, they essentially ordered the Trump administration that it could not legally halt SNAP benefit payments, even if other parts of the government shut down due to lack of funding.
So the courts basically mandated that the food stamp payments had to continue no matter what Congress did.
Pretty much. Which, put the administration in a tricky spot. They had the judicial order to keep paying, but the regular funding mechanism was stalled by the shutdown threat.
So they had to figure out where the money would legally come from?
Exactly. The administration then went back to the courts seeking clarification on how they could legally access funds, specifically asking about using emergency contingency funds, money set aside for unforeseen crises, to cover the SNAP payments until the budget dispute was resolved.
How did the political opposition interpret that move?
Well, critics, mainly Democrats and anti-hunger advocates, accused the administration of slow-walking the solution. They argued it looked like they were deliberately using the threat of SNAP benefits being cut off the potential for widespread hunger as a political bargaining chip to gain leverage in the broader budget negotiations.
A really tough situation, highlighting the clash between political maneuvering and basic human needs.
Definitely. It put the spotlight right on the tension between executive branch tactics and the responsibility to maintain essential social safety nets.
Okay, now let's jump to the other end of the economic spectrum. The EB-5 visa program. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, just made some changes.
That's the EB-5 Immigrant Investor Visa Program, yeah. DHS announced they were reducing some of the application and administrative fees associated with the program.
This is the program where wealthy foreign nationals can essentially get a path to U.S. residency, a green card, by investing a large amount of money.
That's the one. The actual investment amounts needed are still very high currently, between $800,000 and just over $1 million, depending on where the investment project is located. Those thresholds didn't change.
Now, what fees were reduced?
Things like the main petition fee for the investor themselves, that's Form I-526, that was cut by about 14%. And the fee for becoming a designated regional center, those are the entities that manage the investment projects. That fee was cut much more significantly, almost 40%.
What's the criticism of lowering these fees?
Critics argue it just further reinforces the perception of a 2-tiered immigration system, one pathway for the ultra-wealthy based purely on their ability to pay, and another, much harder path for everyone else based on family ties, skills, or humanitarian need. They say it sends a signal that access to the U.S. can be bought if you have enough cash.
Okay, let's touch on Social Security briefly. Every year, there's the announcement of the cost of living adjustment, the COLA. Benefits go up, but does it actually keep pace for most seniors?
That's the perennial issue, isn't it? The COLA does usually result in a nominal increase in benefit checks each year. It's calculated based on a specific measure of inflation, the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, or CPIW.
But that index doesn't necessarily reflect what older Americans actually spend their money on.
Often not perfectly, no. Seniors tend to spend a larger proportion of their income on things like healthcare, prescription drugs, and housing costs. And those specific costs often rise much faster than the general inflation rate captured by the CPIW.
So the check might be slightly bigger, but the actual purchasing power, what they can buy with it, might still be shrinking.
That's the concern for many, yeah. The CLA increase might not fully cover the rising costs of the things they absolutely need, leading to ongoing financial strain for those on fixed incomes.
Right. Okay, let's swing back to global trade now. Some signs of a possible easing of tensions between the U.S. and China, specifically around semiconductor chips.
Yeah, a potentially significant development there concerning Nexperia chips. Nexperia is a company, now Chinese-owned, that makes chips crucial for many industries, but especially for car manufacturing.
The auto industry has been hammered by chip shortages for years now.
Absolutely. So China recently signaled it would loosen some of its restrictions on the export of these Nexperia chips. This came as part of a broader, newly negotiated trade understanding with the U.S.
And what did the U.S. give in return?
The U.S. reciprocated by slightly easing tariffs on certain Chinese goods. They lowered the rate on some items from 57% down to 47%.
Still high, but a reduction.
Still very high, yes. But that 10-point cut is seen as a tangible step. Both sides seem to be acknowledging, perhaps, that the extreme friction over things like chips was causing too much damage to their own economies and global manufacturing, particularly in the auto sector. A slight de-escalation, maybe?
Good news for car makers, perhaps. But Europe still seems very worried about strategic dependencies on China, especially for rare earth elements.
Oh, hugely worried, especially the defense sector. China had previously made noises about potentially expanding export restrictions on rare earths, those minerals critical for high-tech applications.
Things like magnets, lasers, advanced electronics.
Exactly. Minerals like neodymium, dysprosium, they're essential for modern weapon systems, for guidance systems and missiles, for powerful motors in electric vehicles, for wind turbines, you name it.
And while China paused any immediate expansion of restrictions, the underlying vulnerability remains.
Very much so. European Union officials breathed a sigh of relief at the pause, but the dependency is stark. Take Germany's defense industry. It's incredibly reliant on China for many of these crucial rare earth components needed to build tanks, fighter jets, submarines.
So Europe is trying to ramp up defense spending because of perceived threats, potentially including from China or its allies, but needs materials controlled by China to do it.
That's the dangerous bind they're in. It creates this massive strategic imperative for Europe to find or develop new, secure, non-Chinese sources for these critical minerals. That's a huge, expensive, long-term challenge. Diversifying those supply chains is vital, but incredibly difficult.
And speaking of economic adjustments and potential difficulties, even corporate giants are feeling the pressure. Amazon is looking at potentially significant job cuts.
Yeah, reports surfaced suggesting Amazon is considering cutting as many as 30,000 corporate positions, not warehouse workers, but corporate roles management, tech administration.
That's such a large number.
The internal framing seems to be about streamlining operations, improving efficiency, maybe cutting layers of management that built up during rapid expansion. It's likely also a response to broader economic uncertainty, slowing growth in some areas, and pressure from investors to boost profitability.
A sign of maybe wider belt tightening in the tech sector and corporate world.
It certainly reflects that trend, yeah. We've seen similar announcements from other major tech companies over the past year or so. It signals a shift from growth at all costs to a greater focus on efficiency and managing costs in a less certain economic climate.
Okay, let's shift our focus now to how these big events and systemic issues impact people directly, public experience, safety, tragedy, and also how we remember our past. Let's start with the Caribbean and the terrible aftermath of Hurricane Melissa.
Yes, the situation in Jamaica following Hurricane Melissa is truly devastating. The latest reports confirm the death toll has tragically climbed to 28 people.
Just awful. And the impact goes beyond the immediate loss of life, right?
Absolutely. The storm caused massive damage across the island, particularly to agriculture. Farms producing staple crops, fruits, vegetables, as well as livestock operations were hit incredibly hard.
Which leads to longer-term problems.
Yes, serious concerns about potential food shortages in the coming weeks and months. It compounds the already immense challenge of recovery dealing with destroyed homes, infrastructure, and now a threat to food security.
Has there been international help?
The UK, for instance, acted fairly quickly. They organized charter flights to evacuate their citizens who were stranded and also started sending humanitarian aid shipments to help with immediate relief and longer-term rebuilding efforts. It really underscores the vulnerability of small island nations to these increasingly powerful storms, likely linked to climate change.
From a natural disaster to a man-made one, in a sense, a powerful commemoration took place in Novi Sad, Serbia.
A very somber and angry gathering, yes. Tens of thousands of people came out in Novi Sad to mark the first anniversary of the train station roof collapse there. 16 people were killed in that incident.
And this anniversary wasn't just about mourning, it was also about protest.
Very much so. That tragedy has become a real symbol of public anger and frustration with the government. The protesters see the collapse not just as a tragic accident, but as a direct result of what they allege is systemic corruption, cronyism in awarding contracts, and generally poor governance when it comes to public infrastructure safety.
So they're demanding accountability.
Accountability, reforms, even early elections. They feel the government hasn't taken responsibility or addressed the underlying issues that led to the collapse. President Vučić did offer an apology, but for many, it wasn't nearly enough. The anger over alleged corruption runs very deep.
And another instance of safety failure, this one incredibly specific and horrifying, involved a U.S. veteran in a hotel.
Yeah, this was just a shocking and tragic story. A military veteran, apparently traveling to attend his granddaughter's college graduation, died in his hotel shower. The circumstances alleged in the subsequent lawsuit are horrific, that he was essentially scalded to death, boiled alive, due to a failure in the hotel's water temperature control system.
How could that happen? Aren't there safety devices?
There are supposed to be. The lawsuit alleges that the thermostatic mixing valve, which is specifically designed to prevent water from getting dangerously hot, completely failed. It's a stark reminder of how crucial basic maintenance and adherence to safety standards are in places like hotels, and the devastating consequences when those standards aren't met.
Just unthinkable. Okay, let's end by looking at cultural legacy and how we preserve or sometimes fail to preserve history. Starting with Egypt and the grand opening of its new museum.
The Grand Egyptian Museum, or GEM. Yes, Egypt pulled out all the stops for the inauguration. It's a truly massive, architecturally stunning museum right near the Giza pyramids, designed to be the world's largest dedicated to a single civilization, a huge national project.
But the opening wasn't entirely smooth sailing. There was criticism.
Almost immediately, yes. Despite the lavish ceremony, reports quickly emerged focusing on the, quote, absence of significant key objects from the main exhibition halls that were supposed to be open.
Meaning some of the most famous artifacts weren't actually there on day one.
Exactly. Key pieces, including apparently quite a few treasures from the Tutankhamun collection, which was heavily promoted as the museum's centerpiece, were reportedly not yet on display.
Oh, God.
The reasons weren't entirely clear, maybe last-minute conservation needs, logistical problems, maybe even political sensitivities about displaying certain items. But whatever the reason, critics argued it significantly undermined the museum's impact right out of the gate. It raised questions about whether the rush to open for prestige reasons perhaps compromised the curatorial completeness and cast a bit of a shadow over this hugely important project for Egypt's heritage and tourism.
Which brings us back, in a way, to where we started with the dinosaurs. The idea that our understanding of history, whether it's cosmic, cultural, or biological, is always being revised.
It's a perfect loop back, isn't it? That confirmation that Nanotyrannus was its own distinct species, living alongside T-Rex, it's such a great illustration of the scientific process.
Oh, so.
It just reminds us that what we think we know, what seems like settled fact, whether it's how quickly galaxies formed after the Big Bang, or how long it took oxygen to build up on Earth, or even just the cast of characters in the late Cretaceous ecosystem, it's never truly set in stone. New evidence comes along, new analysis, and we have to be ready to adjust, to refine, sometimes to completely rewrite our understanding. History is a living field of study.
So we've covered a huge amount of ground today, from the very edges of the observable universe, with that JD's galaxy forcing a rethink of cosmic dawn.
Right, showing complexity emerged much, much faster than we thought.
To the global wrestling match over who gets to write the rules for artificial intelligence, with China making a major play to shift the center of gravity.
Highlighting that race to set the standards for transformative tech.
And we delved into the immediate human consequences of geopolitics and policy, the intense fighting near Pokrovsk in Ukraine, Russia's unveiling of the Poseidon drone carrier, the political batters over SNAP funding back in the U.S.
Showing how these high-level decisions and conflicts directly impact people's lives and safety nets.
I think the big takeaway for me, listening to all this, is something you touched on earlier. This gap, this lag between the pace of change and our ability to govern it.
That really feels like the central theme, doesn't it? Science and technology, whether it's mapping alien atmospheres, building AI that mimics personality, or sequencing ancient genomes, they're just rocketing forward.
While our institutions, things like NATO's internal procedures, international trade agreements, even domestic programs like SNA or Social Security CLAs, they often seem to struggle to keep up, needing weeks, months, sometimes years to adapt or react effectively.
Yeah, there's this growing mismatch. Technology sprints while governance often seems to walk or sometimes crawl. We're constantly playing catch-up, trying to figure out the ethical, legal, and political implications after the innovation has already happened.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, our listeners. Something connecting that vast cosmic scale back to our present moment. That discovery of Jade's GSZ14-0. It proved that complex structures, whole galaxies, could form incredibly early, incredibly fast in the universe's history, faster than anyone predicted. So the question is, if complexity can burst forth that quickly on a cosmic scale, seemingly out of nowhere, what unforeseen crisis, what next-generation disruptive technology, what entirely new scientific revolution might be coalescing right now? Something building quietly in the background noise of our current political or technological landscape that we're maybe dismissing today is just static.
It's a sobering thought. Big shifts rarely arrive with a warning label. They often just emerge, and then we're left scrambling to understand and respond.
Definitely food for thought. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.